Nobody's looking at happy customers. That's assumed. It's just assumed. And and success stories, number of successes that are actually written down each week. That is one of the statistics. So we can see numerically how many happy customers there are, right? So again, it's all just kind of
force people to write them.
Well, look, happy customers, all right? Don't be bad-mouthing the success stories. Nobody's forcing anybody to do anything in Scientology. No, come on.
No, but you can't go to your next course until you write your success story and get it fucking inspected by who?
But that doesn't mean everybody writes a success story. Some people are just like, yeah, no, I ain't got nothing to write.
And they allow
And if you get a completion without a success story, you don't have a completion. So you got to deal with that, right? You're going to have to fix that person because they're not happy, or at least not happy enough to want to write a success. And not everybody does. So you can strong arm somebody, but if they don't want to, they're not gonna. And I saw that happen a number of times. And then we had to go and find out what was what. You know, sometimes you kind of cajole them into it and they'll go, okay, fine, whatever. But sometimes, I ain't, no.
So what happened with those stubborn cases?
Oh, you fix them. You do some kind of repair session or something, and you make them happy, get the needle floating, you know, again, induce some euphoria through the standard practice of, you know, auditing, which is covert hypnotism and piles and piles of suggestion and social proof and all kinds of other methods of influence to get the person around to being happy. And when they're happy, okay, I'll write a success story, right? And off they go. You know, it's generally speaking, unless somebody's really sour for some reason, in which you're going to have to dig into their life and find out why the hell they're so sour. You know, a lot of people just kind of come around after a session or whatever and get fixed, especially if it's on the org's dime, which sometimes it is and sometimes it's not, depends on the circumstances.
I was about to say, that's surprising to hear on the org's dime.
Yeah, sometimes that happens.
Okay.
The org has to do its own review. I mean, if somebody red tags after a session, you know, sometimes they'll get a repair, and if they're out of hours, you know, they're going to get that repair anyway, because they can't just have the red tag. They can't have the guy just leave and go 24 hours without the needle floating, right? That whole thing.
Can you work their red
That's
tag?
a whole different. That's a red tag. Yeah, that's a whole different thing. But statistics will get penalized if a red tag, that's a state. That's a situation where the whole org statistic can get nullified. Mm-hmm. If you let somebody go over on the red tag 24-hour rule, you got to fix it, and you have 24 hours to do it. So I'm just kind of spewing this random stuff. So if somebody comes and is going to go through their class and they're going to finish it, they go on an e-meter and they get checked. Are you happy with the class? You know, they're asked a couple of questions, and if their needle is not floating on the e-meter doing this kind of a motion, and they're not happy with the service and beaming and wanting to write a success story about how happy they are about this class, then you've got a problem and you got to fix it. And you have, now that's not a red tag though. That's just a problem you got to fix. And you got to fix it quick. And that's going to require a review of some kind or correction of some kind, because clearly the guy didn't get something if he's all sour at the end of his class.
Yeah.
But for auditing, if you come out of an auditing session, you go to an examiner. Again, somebody else is putting you on an e-meter and checking your needle. And that's all they're doing. They're not talking to you. They're just looking at your needle. And you just sit there. And you can say whatever you want. And this is the exam that you get following every auditing session that's delivered in an org. So you go to the examiner, and if your needle is not floating, this is called a red piece of paper with the time and date of your no FN, your failure to FN, is put on your pre-clear folder. The auditor just brought you out of session. He's got your folder. The red tag is put on the folder prominently with the date and time noted. And the org has 24 hours to get that tag off of that folder, which means they have to produce a floating needle in this guy at another exam. Now he can go right back in and say whatever he wants to say, and maybe his needle floats at that point, and then, you know, the red tag is probably lifted. But if he's pissy or sour or upset or mad about his session, and this does happen, the red tag stays on, and the org has to get him back in session. Usually it's supposed to be immediately. All right, come with me. We're going right back in. And the auditor has to fix it. And there are actions the auditor can do called correction lists to fix it. And that's supposed to get the needle floating again and get it down to the examiner, and the examiner can see the needle is floating, right? And this is sort of the quality control check that the org has built into its system, you know, systematically, to make sure that auditors get the result they're supposed to get, is somebody else checks them by putting the person on the e-meter. And this is called the exam. That's why it's called an exam. Mm-hmm. And so, and that's the red tag. And if you, and like I said, you got 24 hours. Let's say it's 10 o'clock at night and the guy's, you know, just not FNing. And you can't take him back in session. He's tired. He's hungry. It's 10 o'clock. You got to schedule him for as soon as possible the next day. And if the guy has to go to work, you know, you might have to wait until like 5 or 6 o'clock for him to show up, and you're praying the entire day that this guy is having a good day at work. This isn't the day he gets fired or some shit, right?
No BBIs.
Because you got to get that FN, and you got 24 hours to get it. Now, most of the time, the org gets really heavy-handed about this and absolutely insists that the guy comes in the following morning, first thing. And if the auditor is a nighttime auditor, he's got to come in during the day. You taking a day off work, buddy. This is your pre-clear, and he's red tagged, and you're dealing with it, right? Mm-hmm. You're taking responsibility for it. So, you know, they got to get the guy back in session, or the woman back in session, and get that red tag off. And if they don't, the entire, if I remember this right, and you can look this up, I believe it's in the policies that you have. The penalty is like the entire Division 5, mm-hmm. which is the division responsible for org correction. I think they lose their entire statistics for like every day that this red tag is not dealt with.
Hang on.
And the org's major statistic of paid completions, which I mentioned earlier, is zeroed out every day that you have red tags going over. So you don't ever want red tags going over, because it's basically like nobody showed up to work that day, statistically speaking, right? And you can have crashes in statistics because of this red tag thing. I've seen it. I've seen red tags go on for 2 or 3 days, and people are just, I mean, they got dark circles under their eyes by that point. I mean, it's just been sleepless nights and frantic, you know, trying to deal with getting this person to FN, right? And more than once, I saw people just give up. It's after 5 or 6 days, they were just like, fuck it, we're not going to keep penalizing ourselves for this. And they stopped taking the penalty, and management was like, okay, all right, it's just for that week. We're not going to let it roll over, right? Even though per policy, that's exactly what they were supposed to do. So it's all fun and games in there, you know, but that's the whole red tag thing.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some of the reasons for red tags. So like you mentioned, no FN at exams, roller coaster bad exam report, PC ill within a few days of any major case action. Fuck.
Yep. Oh yeah, you'll have people who will have a session and then they'll come back in a few hours later. I don't feel so good. I was feeling great. Now I don't. Needle's all dirty and shit. You know, okay. Red tag. Get you back in session, get it fixed. That's generally, again, people will generally be paying for their repair sessions, by the way. It's very rarely is it on the org, but mostly that happens when you're recovering people. The org will end up paying for, you know, we'll give a person a 1 or 2, even 3 I've seen sessions for free. Mm-hmm. But you got to be pretty desperate to get a person back to give them 3 free sessions. That's a lot for Scientology. That's very generous of the org to be doing that.